What happened to Rachel Zegler? Just a few years ago, she was Hollywood's rising star, headlining major films, gaining attention for her talent and voice, and even being cast in iconic roles for legendary studios. But somewhere along the way, things took a hard turn. Public perception shifted, fan enthusiasm cooled off, and now one of Disney's most highly anticipated remakes, Snow White, is surrounded by controversy, criticism, and uncertainty. So let's break it all down. How we got here, what went wrong, and why Rachel Zegler's behavior may have seriously impacted one of Disney's biggest projects in years. Back in 2021, Rachel Zegler had a dream breakout. She landed the lead role of Maria in Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, and the industry buzz was undeniable. She had the vocal chops, the screen presence, and, on paper, everything needed to become the next big thing. Critics praised her debut, and Disney cast her as Snow White, arguably one of the most iconic princesses of all time. For a while, it seemed like nothing could go wrong. But then, the interviews started. Clips began surfacing of Rachel making comments about the original Snow White that didn't sit well with longtime fans. She described the 1937 animated classic as dated, and said the new version would focus less on romance and more on Snow White becoming a leader in her own right. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with modernization. Every generation reinterprets fairy tales. It's what keeps them alive. But it was Rachel's tone, delivery, and comments that rubbed people the wrong way. In one now viral clip, she seemed to mock the idea of Snow White's prince being important to the story, calling him weird and joking that he was basically a stalker. That didn't go over well. Fans of the original, many of whom grew up with that film, felt like she was dismissing a beloved classic instead of honoring it. The problem wasn't just the message, it was the attitude behind it. Rather than promoting a fresh take, many thought she was putting down the very thing she was hired to represent. And that's when the tide turned. People started calling her out on social media. Accusations of being out of touch, disrespectful to fans, and overly woke began popping up everywhere. YouTubers, influencers, and even mainstream outlets picked up the story. The more Rachel tried to clarify her points, the worse things seemed to get. Critics accused her of virtue signaling, while others pointed out how her comments alienated the core Disney audience. Families, nostalgic millennials, and yes, even kids who still love fairy tale magic. To make matters worse, behind-the-scenes photos from the Snow White set showed a version of the story that looked drastically different from what people expected. The 7 dwarfs? Not dwarfs? The classic dress? Modified? The whole aesthetic? Unrecognizable to many fans. It didn't feel like Snow White anymore. And to some, Rachel Zegler was seen as the face of that change, not in a positive way. So let's talk about the money. The reported budget for the film ballooned to over $270 million. That's a massive investment for any movie, especially one based on a story almost a century old. But the buzz wasn't good. Early projections started to look shaky, and audiences who might have shown up opening weekend just weren't interested anymore. Compare that to films like The Little Mermaid, which, despite its own controversies, still pulled decent global numbers. Or even Lilo and Stitch, which is gaining more positive attention simply because it appears to be staying truer to the original. It became clear that the negative sentiment surrounding Snow White wasn't just noise. It was affecting real-world enthusiasm and possibly box office potential. In an attempt to control the narrative, Rachel and the studio pivoted. She started posting more personal, relatable content, like updates about her dog being sick or casual selfies on the street. And while there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable online, some saw this as a calculated effort to soften her image and regain public sympathy. Others weren't buying it. Audiences are smart, and they can tell when something feels inauthentic. Trying to appear relatable after months of controversial takes just didn't resonate the way it might have in a different context. And then there's the recent stage production she's been cast in, a musical in London tied to one of the most iconic roles in theater history. Ticket sales? Reportedly slow. Despite her growing resume, it looks like public interest just isn't translating into ticket sales or streaming views. So, what does this all mean? At the core of it, Rachel Zegler's fall from grace isn't just about one person. It's about Hollywood's growing disconnect from its audience. Fans aren't rejecting change or diversity. They're rejecting being talked down to. They're tired of lectures in place of storytelling.